Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to find out they were plotting against you behind closed doors? Imagine discovering your own husband and your mother in secret betrayal. Would your heart shatter, or would you fight back? Stick with me. Like, share, and subscribe. This story will change you. The gravel crunched under my tires as I turned down my mother's long country driveway, the Texas sun glaring off the hood of my SUV. My son Ethan, 11 years old, sat beside me humming softly, his legs swinging in rhythm to a song only he could hear. He was excited to see his grandmother. I should have been excited too. But then I saw it. A gray Ford F-150 truck parked right by my mother's front gate, the same truck I had seen in my driveway every single night for 15 years. My husband's truck. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, my breath catching in my throat. Robert wasn't supposed to be here. He had told me he'd be 3 hours away in Dallas for a meeting with one of his freight clients. Yet here was his truck, parked at my mother's house on a Thursday afternoon. Something was wrong. I pulled over on the side of the gravel drive, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid Ethan could hear it. "Sweetheart," I said carefully, forcing a smile, "why don't you grab your backpack and wait for me by the big oak tree over there? I just need a minute to check something before we go inside." He frowned but obeyed, slipping out of the car and trudging toward the shady tree with his sketchbook in hand. He trusted me completely. I had to stay strong, for him. Silently, I stepped out of the car and closed the door without a sound. My sandals pressed softly into the dirt as I moved closer to the house. The blinds in the living room window were tilted just enough for me to see inside. And what I saw made my stomach twist. There at my mother's dining table sat Robert, my husband of 15 years, and Margaret, my 68-year-old mother. Their heads were bent close together, their voices low but urgent. My heart raced as I pressed myself against the side of the house, straining to hear. "She won't fight it," my husband was saying, his voice confident, almost smug. "Evelyn doesn't have the guts. She'll sign whatever papers we put in front of her." My mother's voice followed, cold and clipped. "She's always been too soft. You and I both know she doesn't have a head for business. Once the house is in your name, we can sell it. You'll finally have the capital you need, and I'll get my share." The words stabbed into me like knives. My husband and my own mother, plotting together, to betray me, to steal everything I had worked for. I stumbled back, my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. My world tilted violently, like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I wanted to storm in, to scream, to demand answers. But something stopped me. I heard Robert's voice again. "Don't worry, Margaret. Evelyn's too busy with Ethan to notice the details. She's been living in her little dream world too long. She won't see this coming." I bit down hard on my lip until I tasted blood. They thought I was weak. They thought I was blind. But they were wrong. That night, when I lay awake in my bed beside Robert, pretending to sleep, I remembered every sign I had ignored. The late-night phone calls he'd silenced when I walked into the room. The way my mother had always defended him, even when he belittled me in front of family. The quiet smirks they exchanged at holiday dinners, as if they shared some private joke at my expense. And then there were the finances. For months I'd noticed missing funds from our joint account. Robert always had an excuse: a late payment from a client, a transfer mistake at the bank, a business expense he'd forgotten to mention. My mother even scolded me once, saying I worried too much about money, that a wife should trust her husband. I had wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe my marriage and my family were safe. But deep down, a gnawing voice had whispered, "Something isn't right." Now, hearing them plotting in my mother's kitchen, I knew the truth. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It had been growing, festering in the shadows of my own home, and I had chosen not to see it. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I quickly silenced it. If Robert or my mother heard me outside that window, it would all be over. I leaned closer. "We'll serve her the divorce papers on her birthday," my mother was saying, her tone sharp. "The shock will keep her from thinking clearly. By the time she realizes what's happened, the house will already be sold." I pressed my back to the wall, my chest heaving. My own mother, my blood. She wanted to destroy me, just to take what was mine. Ethan's laugh drifted across the yard, innocent and sweet. I turned toward him, my eyes burning with tears I refused to shed. No, I couldn't break. Not now. Not in front of my son. I straightened, my mind racing. They thought I was powerless, a naive housewife clinging to scraps of independence. But they didn't know everything. Because what Robert and my mother didn't realize was that I had been preparing. Quietly. Carefully. And soon they would learn that the woman they underestimated, the woman they plotted against, was about to become their greatest threat. When I drove away from my mother's house that afternoon with Ethan in the back seat, my face must have looked calm. To him, it was just another visit to Grandma's that ended early. He didn't know that inside me, everything had shattered. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel, but my mind had never been sharper. For the first time, I couldn't deny the truth. Robert and my mother had joined forces. And they weren't just plotting to hurt me emotionally. They were planning to take everything. Our house, our savings, even my dignity. I dropped Ethan off at a friend's for the evening, claiming I needed to run errands. In reality, I parked my car in an empty lot and sat there for hours, staring at the fading light on the horizon, letting memory after memory wash over me like waves I could no longer hold back. I remembered the first time Robert dismissed me in front of my mother. It was Thanksgiving 3 years ago. I had spent 2 full days preparing the meal, roasting the turkey, baking pies, setting the table with the china that belonged to my grandmother. When we all sat down, Robert smirked and said, "Careful with the stuffing, Margaret. You know Evelyn always overseasons things." The table erupted in laughter. My mother especially. She laughed harder than anyone, clutching her chest as if it were the funniest joke in the world. I laughed too, because what else could I do? But inside, it stung. That was the first cut. Small, but sharp. The cuts only multiplied over the years. There were the business trips Robert took without explanation. The ones that left me alone with Ethan night after night. There were the times my mother would call me too emotional or too sensitive whenever I confronted Robert about money. There was the Christmas Eve when Robert forgot to bring home gifts for Ethan, and my mother covered for him, insisting, "Evelyn, you're always so dramatic. Boys don't need presents, they need strong fathers." It wasn't just my husband who had betrayed me, it was the woman who had given me life. And yet, as I sat in that empty lot, memories swirling, I realized something else. I had never been completely blind. My instincts had been warning me for months, years even, and part of me had already started preparing, even before I fully understood why. 2 years ago, after finding unexplained withdrawals from our joint account, I quietly opened a savings account in my name only. At first, it was just a safety net. A few $100s tucked away, then a few thousand. I told myself it was for emergencies, but deep down, I think I knew it was for this. Last year, after Robert missed Ethan's parent-teacher conference because of yet another client dinner, I started keeping records. Every late night, every unexplained expense, every belittling comment my mother or Robert made. I kept a journal, typed notes, even took photos of documents Robert left lying around. I didn't know what I would use them for, but something in my gut told me not to let them disappear. And then there was the voice recorder. It was small, sleek, and easy to slip into my purse. I bought it on a whim after reading an article about protecting yourself in legal disputes. For months, it sat unused in my desk drawer. Until that afternoon at my mother's house. That was the day I started carrying it with me everywhere. The recording I captured through her window was only the beginning. That night, after Ethan was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table in the dim glow of a single lamp. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I spread out my journal, my receipts, my notes. Each page was a reminder of how much I had tolerated, how much I had excused in the name of family. But no more. I opened my laptop and typed a message to a name I hadn't said out loud in years. Daniel Carter. Daniel had been my father's lawyer before he passed away. He was older now, probably semi-retired, but I knew one thing. He was loyal to my father, and he had always been kind to me. If anyone could help me navigate the storm I was walking into, it was him. I didn't send the email yet. I wasn't ready to make my move. Not until I had gathered every piece of evidence. But drafting that message gave me a strange sense of power. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like prey. The next morning I poured Robert his coffee and smiled as if nothing had changed. He kissed me on the cheek absent-mindedly, already scrolling through his phone. "Big day," he said casually. "I might be late tonight." I just nodded, hiding the recorder in my apron pocket, capturing every word. "Don't wait up," he added. "I won't," I replied, my tone even. Inside, though, my mind was already racing. I would need bank records. I would need proof of ownership of the house. I would need to protect Ethan above all else. Robert thought he was building a case against me. What he didn't know was that I was already building mine against him. Days turned into weeks, and my secret preparations grew. While Robert spent evenings working late, I quietly visited the county clerk's office, making copies of property deeds. I sat in my car outside his office building, snapping photos of him leaving with a woman I didn't recognize. I even found messages on his tablet one night when he carelessly left it unlocked, messages that weren't just about business. My mother's name appeared in several of them, short, curt notes. "She suspects nothing. She won't fight you. Make sure Ethan stays with you, not her." Reading those words, I felt a chill so deep it made me shiver. My mother wasn't just conspiring with Robert to take the house. She wanted to take my son from me. That was when I stopped being afraid. By the time autumn leaves began falling across our lawn, my evidence folder was thick. Bank statements, recordings, photos, notes, all neatly organized and backed up to a cloud drive Robert knew nothing about. I had even secured a small storage unit in town, just in case I needed to hide documents somewhere he couldn't find them. Every time I added a new piece to the folder, I felt a surge of strength. The Evelyn who had once laughed nervously at Robert's cruel jokes, who had once swallowed her mother's sharp words, was gone. In her place stood someone different, someone stronger. Someone who knew that survival sometimes meant playing the long game, and I was ready to play. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "are you okay? You seem different." I smiled, brushing his hair from his forehead. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about the future." And I meant it, because while Robert and my mother were busy plotting my downfall, I was already preparing their ruin. The decision came to me one sleepless night, long after Robert had passed out on the couch with an empty beer bottle resting on his stomach. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to his snores rattle through the house. My chest ached with anger, but underneath that anger was something sharper. Determination. I slipped quietly from bed, went to the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. The glow from the screen lit my face as I typed a message. "Daniel, it's Evelyn Parker. I don't know if you remember me, but you were my father's lawyer years ago. I need your help. Urgently." I stared at the words for a long time before pressing send. It felt like crossing a line I couldn't come back from, but once the email was gone, I felt lighter, safer. Because now I wasn't alone. Daniel called me the next morning before Robert had even left for work. His voice was gravelly with age, but strong. "Evelyn? Of course I remember you. You sound troubled. What's going on?" I glanced at Ethan eating his cereal at the table, swinging his legs like a carefree boy. I lowered my voice. "It's about Robert and my mother. They're planning things that could take everything from me." Daniel didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I told him about the conversation I overheard at my mother's house, about the bank withdrawals, about the cruel plan to serve me divorce papers on my birthday, his tone hardened. "Evelyn, you need to come see me right away. Bring everything you have." That afternoon, while Robert thought I was grocery shopping, I drove an hour to Daniel's modest office downtown. The place smelled of old books and strong coffee. Daniel sat behind a desk stacked with legal files, his silver hair combed neatly back. "Show me what you've got," he said. One by one, I laid out my evidence: bank statements, receipts, photos, the voice recording from my mother's window. His eyebrows rose higher with each piece. "You've been smart," he said finally. "Smarter than they think you are. With this much proof, Robert won't just lose the house. He could lose custody, his business, and depending on how far we push, maybe even his freedom." For the first time in months, I exhaled fully. "But my mother," he leaned forward, "we can deal with her too. If she's conspiring to defraud you, that's serious. But Evelyn," his voice softened, "you need to keep collecting. We'll need dates, signatures, more recordings if possible. Don't let them suspect you know. The moment they realize, they'll move fast. We need to be faster. I nodded, gripping my folder. I'll get everything. From that day, I lived a double life. By morning, I was the dutiful wife and daughter, pouring coffee, attending family dinners, smiling when Robert bragged about his business expansions. By night, I became the investigator of my own life, cataloging every lie, every transaction, every whispered phone call. Robert left his briefcase open one evening while showering. I snapped photos of contract drafts that hinted at property transfers. Another night, I overheard my mother on speakerphone telling Robert, "We'll make sure Ethan stays with you. Evelyn's too fragile to raise him alone." My stomach turned, but my hand stayed steady as I pressed record. Every insult, every betrayal, became another weapon in my arsenal. Still, there were moments when fear clawed at me. Once, Robert came home early and found me at the desk with papers spread out. My heart nearly stopped. "What's all this?" he asked suspiciously. "Budget planning," I lied smoothly, pushing the papers into a neat pile. "You know me, always overthinking." He smirked, kissed the top of my head, and walked away. I waited until the sound of the TV filled the room before letting out the breath I'd been holding. That night, I backed up every file onto a cloud drive under a false name. If Robert destroyed my laptop, the evidence would still exist. Meanwhile, Daniel became my anchor. We met weekly in secret. He taught me how to organize evidence, how to request copies of financial documents without raising suspicion, how to protect Ethan legally. "Your son comes first," he said firmly one afternoon. "We'll make sure Robert can't use him as leverage." Those words stayed with me. Every time Ethan hugged me, every time he fell asleep against my shoulder, I remembered. This fight wasn't just for me, it was for him. For his safety, his future. As weeks passed, my folder grew thick enough to rival a phone book. Robert's business expenses that didn't add up. Text messages between him and a woman named Sabrina that left little doubt of his infidelity. Transfers from our joint account into one solely under his name. And most damning of all, the audio of him and my mother conspiring in her kitchen. "Once the papers are signed, it's over," my mother had said. "Evelyn will have no choice but to leave quietly." But I wasn't leaving quietly. Then came the turning point. One chilly October evening, Robert stormed into the house, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. "Where's dinner?" he barked. I bit my tongue and served him without a word. But inside, fire raged. He didn't notice the recorder tucked in my sleeve. He didn't notice me documenting his every outburst. He thought I was still the woman who swallowed insults and played nice. But the truth was, I was biding my time. Later that night, after Ethan was asleep, I stood in the doorway watching Robert snore in his recliner. My fists clenched at my sides. Soon, I promised myself. Soon, the man who had underestimated me and the mother who had betrayed me would be exposed for who they really were. The next morning, I met Daniel again. His office smelled faintly of rain and old paper. I handed him a flash drive filled with recordings. He leaned back, scanning the list of files. "Evelyn, this is enough to bury him." "Not yet," I said firmly. "Not until the timing is right. I want them to feel safe. I want them to believe I'm still blind. Then," I swallowed hard, "then I'll strike." Daniel studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You've got your father's fire. He'd be proud." My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to cry anymore. That night, as I tucked Ethan in, he looked at me with those clear, trusting eyes again. "Mom, do you promise nothing bad is going to happen to us?" I smoothed his hair, forcing a steady smile. "I promise, sweetheart. I'm making sure of it." And as I kissed his forehead, I knew it was true, because the Evelyn who once ignored the signs was gone. In her place stood a woman armed with proof, guided by purpose, and ready to unleash everything she had been holding back. The air was heavy with the smell of my mother's pot roast when I pushed open her front door. My pulse hammered in my ears, but my face carried the calm mask I had perfected over months of preparation. Robert was already there, his truck parked arrogantly in the driveway like a flag planted on conquered land. I stepped inside and saw him seated at the dining table, relaxed, sipping whiskey. My mother sat across from him, pearls at her throat, looking smug as if the world belonged to them. Neither of them expected me. "Evelyn," my mother said coolly, setting down her glass. "We weren't expecting you." I smiled faintly. "I know." Robert frowned, his eyes narrowing. What's this about? For a long moment, I just stood there, taking them in, the man I had built a life with and the woman who had raised me, both of them looking at me as though I were an inconvenience. Then I reached into my purse and placed a small digital recorder on the table. I pressed play. Their own voices filled the room. "She won't fight it." Robert's voice crackled, recorded from that afternoon weeks ago. "Evelyn doesn't have the guts. She'll sign whatever papers we put in front of her." My mother's reply followed, sharp and unmistakable. "She's always been too soft. Once the house is in your name, we can sell it. You'll finally have the capital you need, and I'll get my share." The color drained from both their faces. Robert lurched forward, stabbing the pause button with his finger. "What the hell is this?" "Proof," I said evenly, my voice stronger than I ever imagined it could be. "Proof that the two people I trusted most conspired against me. Proof that neither of you can deny." My mother recovered first, her lips curling. "You don't understand, Evelyn. We were just discussing possibilities." "Possibilities?" I laughed, a bitter sound. "Like serving me divorce papers on my birthday? Like taking my son from me because you think I'm too fragile? Those don't sound like possibilities. They sound like plans." Robert's jaw tightened. "You're blowing this out of proportion. You always do." I leaned closer, my eyes locked on his. "Don't patronize me, Robert. Not this time. I have more than recordings. I have bank statements, text messages, photographs, every secret meeting, every hidden transfer. You left a trail a mile wide, and I've followed every step." For the first time, I saw real fear flicker in his eyes. My mother's face, though, remained cold. "You think you're clever, Evelyn. What do you plan to do with this little collection of yours? Air our family's dirty laundry? Do you have any idea how humiliating this would be for you?" "No, Mother," I said softly, "for you." At that moment, I turned my head slightly toward the doorway. The Hendersons, our neighbors, stood frozen on the porch, their eyes wide. They had clearly heard every word through the open window. Mrs. Henderson's hand flew to her mouth. My mother's composure cracked. "Close that door," she snapped. But it was too late. The whispers had already begun. Robert slammed his fist on the table, trying to reclaim control. "Enough. You think some recordings and bank slips will stand in court? Judges don't care about gossip." I slid a thick folder across the table. "This isn't gossip. This is evidence, Robert. Evidence Daniel Carter will be filing first thing Monday morning." At the mention of Daniel's name, his face blanched. Everyone in town knew Daniel Carter's reputation for crushing opponents in the courtroom. "You went to Daniel?" Robert hissed. I nodded. "And he's very interested in your finances, fraudulent transfers, undisclosed income, infidelity. You've given us plenty to work with." My mother slammed her glass down, shards flying. "How dare you go against your own family?" I met her glare with steel in my eyes. "You stopped being my family the moment you chose him over me." The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Robert stood slowly, trying to loom over me. "You don't want to do this, Evelyn. Think about Ethan. Do you really want to drag him through a divorce? Do you want him to see his mother destroy his father?" My voice didn't waver. "I want him to see his mother fight back, to see her refuse to be broken. I want him to know that lies have consequences." Robert's mask cracked. He lunged across the table, his hand reaching for the recorder. But I was faster. I snatched it up and slipped it back into my purse. "Try to take this from me," I warned, my voice ice. "And I'll send copies to every client you've ever worked with, to every neighbor on the street, to the sheriff if I have to." He froze, his chest heaving. For the first time in 15 years, Robert realized I wasn't bluffing. My mother rose, her pearls glinting under the chandelier. "You'll regret this, Evelyn. You can't survive without us. You've always been weak." I smiled then, a small, triumphant smile. "That's where you're wrong. I've survived despite you. And now I'm done surviving. I'm taking back everything you tried to steal." The Hendersons were still watching from the doorway, whispering to each other, their eyes wide with shock. I could only imagine how fast this story would spread through the neighborhood, through the church, through the entire town. By morning, the betrayal of Margaret and Robert Parker would be public knowledge. And that, I thought, was justice in its first form. Robert collapsed back into his chair, rubbing his temples. My mother turned away, staring into her untouched plate as though she could wish herself invisible. Neither of them spoke. I slipped my purse strap over my shoulder. Standing tall. "Enjoy your dinner," I said calmly. "It will be your last peaceful one for a long time." And with that, I walked out, closing the door behind me. The night air was cool against my skin as I stepped onto the porch. Ethan was waiting in the car, sketchbook in hand, oblivious to the storm raging behind me. He looked up, smiling. "Ready to go home, Mom?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady, my chest lighter than it had been in months. "We're ready." As I buckled him in, I glanced once more at the house where my mother and husband sat in silence, their empire of lies crumbling around them. They thought they had cornered me. But tonight, I had shown them the truth. And this was only the beginning. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and dust, the kind of place where destinies shift with the bang of a gavel. I walked in with my head high, my hand resting gently on Ethan's shoulder as we passed through the metal detectors. Daniel Carter strode beside me, his briefcase packed with months of my carefully gathered evidence. Across the hallway, Robert stood with his new attorney, his tie crooked, his eyes bloodshot. He looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of his arrogance had finally crushed him. Beside him, my mother sat rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line, pretending not to see me. The bailiff called our case, and we filed into the courtroom. I could feel dozens of eyes on us, neighbors, colleagues, people who had heard the whispers and wanted to see the spectacle unfold. For once, the whispers didn't cut me. They fueled me. Robert's lawyer tried to paint me as unstable, emotional, incapable of handling finances. It might have worked once, but not now. Daniel rose slowly, buttoning his jacket, his voice carrying across the room like a steady drumbeat. "Your Honor, the defense claims Mrs. Parker is unstable. Let's look at the facts." He laid out the recordings, one by one, Robert's voice sneering through the speakers, my mother's conspiratorial tone filling the air. He produced bank statements showing Robert's secret transfers, photos of him with Sabrina, messages where he openly mocked me and plotted to take Ethan away. By the time Daniel finished, the courtroom was silent, except for the scratching of the judge's pen. When Robert took the stand, his confidence cracked like thin ice. I was under pressure," he stammered. "The business." "Which business?" Daniel interrupted smoothly. "The one where you hid assets under your sole account? Or the one where you funneled money into personal expenses while your wife balanced the family's finances? Perhaps the one where you conspired with your mother-in-law to defraud your own wife?" Robert's face turned crimson. "That's not." But the judge cut him off. "Mr. Parker, sit down." Then it was my mother's turn. Margaret Caldwell, the matriarch who once commanded every room, now sat trembling under the fluorescent lights. "Mrs. Caldwell," Daniel began, his tone deceptively polite, "did you or did you not tell your son-in-law that Evelyn would sign whatever papers you put in front of her?" Her pearls rattled against each other as she shifted uncomfortably. I may have said something in frustration." Daniel pressed play. Her own voice echoed through the speakers, cold and sharp. "She's always been too soft. Once the house is in your name, we can sell it. You'll finally have the capital you need, and I'll get my share." The gallery gasped. My mother closed her eyes, shame painting her cheeks. By the time closing arguments came, there was no doubt left. The judge's ruling was swift, his voice firm. Custody of the minor child, Ethan Parker, is awarded solely to his mother, Evelyn Parker. The marital residence and assets shall remain with Mrs. Parker. Mr. Parker's undisclosed accounts are hereby frozen pending investigation into possible fraud. Furthermore, the court finds credible evidence of conspiracy between Mr. Parker and Mrs. Caldwell, which will be referred to the district attorney for review. The gavel struck, and just like that, the empire Robert and my mother had built on lies collapsed. Robert shot to his feet, his voice breaking. "This isn't fair. She tricked me. She's lying." But no one listened. Not the judge, not the bailiff escorting him out, not even the neighbors who once admired him. His protests were nothing more than noise now. My mother didn't speak. She couldn't. She sat frozen, her hands trembling, while whispers swirled through the courtroom like wildfire. By evening, every church circle and country club in town would know. Margaret Caldwell had betrayed her own daughter, and now she was nothing more than a cautionary tale. After the ruling, Daniel placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Evelyn." He stood up to them. I swallowed hard, my throat thick with emotion. No, I said quietly, glancing at Ethan. We did it. The weeks that followed were a blur. Robert's business unraveled as clients pulled contracts, unwilling to be associated with a man accused of fraud. His once proud name became a curse whispered in hushed tones. He moved into a shabby apartment across town, a far cry from the home he had once tried to steal from me. My mother, stripped of her social standing, found herself uninvited from luncheons and ignored at church pews. For a woman who thrived on reputation, it was a punishment worse than prison. As for me, I signed the papers transferring sole ownership of the house into my name, my hand steady as I wrote. The same house Robert and Margaret had conspired to sell out from under me was now mine, untouchable. But I didn't stop there. The savings I had tucked away, combined with compensation awarded in the divorce, became seed money for something bigger. With Daniel's guidance, I started my own consulting business, specializing in helping women protect their assets and navigate betrayal. Clients came quickly. Women who had been silenced, dismissed, underestimated. They saw in me not just a consultant, but proof that survival was possible, that thriving was possible. My first speaking engagement was at the community center downtown. I stood at the podium, Ethan sitting proudly in the front row, and told my story. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. They thought I was weak, I told the crowd, my voice clear. They thought I would fold, that I would sign away everything. But strength doesn't come from never being broken. It comes from standing back up when people try to break you. It comes from fighting for yourself and for the people you love. The applause was thunderous. Ethan's smile was brighter than any stage light. One evening, months later, I stood on the porch of my home as the Texas sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold. Ethan ran across the yard with our dog, laughter ringing in the air. For the first time in years, I felt peace. The betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but instead it became the fire that forged me into someone new, someone stronger. Robert lost his power, my mother lost her mask, and I gained my freedom. I whispered softly to the wind, words meant only for myself. This house is built on truth, not lies. And that's why no one will ever take it from us again. So that's how the story closes, my wonderful friends. If you're still here, it means something touched your heart. Remember what Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Healing begins there. If this spoke to you, like, share, and subscribe. Let's walk stronger together.